There are moments when everything in your life appears perfectly intact from the outside, yet something inside you has begun to shift in ways you cannot yet name. You wake up in the same bed, walk through the same rooms, speak to the same people, but somewhere beneath the surface of your ordinary days, a quiet dissonance has started to hum. It's not loud enough to alarm you, not obvious enough to explain to anyone else, but it's there, persistent and undeniable, like a note played slightly out of tune in a familiar song. You may not notice it at first. Most people don't. The mind is extraordinarily skilled at smoothing over inconsistencies, at convincing you that what you're feeling is nothing more than fatigue, stress, or the natural ebb and flow of life. But the feeling doesn't leave, it grows. And one day, in the middle of an unremarkable moment, perhaps while sitting in traffic or standing in your kitchen at dusk, you realize something unsettling. The life you've been living no longer fits the person you're becoming. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon deeply. He spent decades studying the moments when the unconscious mind begins to assert itself, when the deeper self refuses to remain silent any longer. Jung said, "There's no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. This is the threshold you're standing at now, whether you realize it or not. The unconscious has begun its work, and it will not stop until you listen." What's striking is that most people assume transformation arrives as a dramatic event, a sudden crisis that reshapes everything in an instant. But Jung knew differently. He understood that the turning point doesn't announce itself with thunder. It whispers. It creates subtle misalignments. It plants questions in your mind that refuse to be answered by your old ways of thinking. And if you're seeing this video right now, at this particular moment in your life, perhaps it's because that whisper has already begun. So the question isn't whether you're ready for change. The real question is this: are you finally willing to listen to what your soul has been trying to tell you all along? Number one, the turning point doesn't come from outside, but rises from the unconscious. You may think that transformation requires some external catalyst, some life-altering event that forces you to become different. A job loss, a relationship ending, a health crisis. But according to Jung, the deepest transformations don't originate in the visible world at all. They rise from the unconscious, from that vast interior landscape that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The turning point you're experiencing now didn't begin yesterday or last week. It's been building beneath your awareness for months, perhaps years, like pressure accumulating beneath the Earth's surface. Think of it like this. Imagine a house that appears perfectly sound from the outside. The walls are painted, the windows are clean, the roof looks intact. But deep beneath the house, in the foundation where no one ever looks, tiny cracks have been forming. Water seeps in during storms. The soil shifts. Small fractures spread through the concrete, invisible to anyone standing in the living room admiring the decor. For years, the house continues to function. People live in it, entertain guests, go about their daily routines without suspecting anything is wrong. But the foundation knows. The foundation is sending signals, subtle tremors that only those who pay attention can feel. One day, a homeowner notices that a door no longer closes quite right. A window that used to slide smoothly now sticks. There's a barely perceptible slope in the floor that wasn't there before. These aren't dramatic failures. They're whispers from the foundation, gentle warnings that something deeper needs attention. But most people don't interpret them correctly. They oil the window. They plane the door. They convince themselves it's just the house settling, nothing serious. And the foundation continues to crack. This is precisely how the unconscious operates when it's preparing you for transformation. It doesn't shout. It doesn't create immediate catastrophe. It sends signals through the smallest channels available, through feelings you can't quite name, through dreams that linger strangely in your memory, through moments when you look at your own reflection and wonder, who am I becoming? Jung believed that the unconscious is not an enemy trying to sabotage your carefully constructed life. It's the deepest part of you, the part that knows your true nature, trying desperately to bring you back into alignment with who you actually are beneath all the roles you've learned to play. Jung said, "The unconscious mind of man sees correctly even when conscious reason is blind and impotent." What he meant is this: your conscious mind, your ego, can rationalize anything. It can convince you to stay in situations that are slowly killing your spirit. It can justify choices that contradict your deepest values. It can build elaborate stories about why things are the way they are, why you should be grateful, why you shouldn't ask for more. But the unconscious cannot be fooled. It sees the truth with perfect clarity, and when that truth contradicts the life you're living, it begins to create dissonance, pressure, pain. The unconscious speaks in the language of symbols, emotions, and bodily sensations. It communicates through the things that suddenly irritate you for no apparent reason, through the exhaustion that sleep cannot cure, through the inexplicable urge to walk away from everything you've built. These are not random occurrences. They are precise communications from the deepest part of your being, telling you that the foundation has shifted and the house can no longer stand as it is. What's interesting is that the unconscious doesn't need grand events to get your attention. It starts small, a feeling of heaviness when you wake up, a moment of disconnection during a conversation, a sudden awareness that you're going through the motions of your life without actually inhabiting it. These tiny signals are the first signs that you've reached the turning point, that the unconscious has begun its work, and that something within you is demanding to be heard. And when these signals appear, you have two choices. You can continue to ignore them, to rationalize them away, to distract yourself with busyness and noise. Or you can do what Jung spent his life teaching people to do. You can turn inward, face what's rising, and allow the transformation to unfold. Sign 1, life becomes heavy without any clear reason. From the very moment the unconscious begins to rise, you step into the first sign. And this sign is unmistakable once you know what to look for. It arrives as a heaviness, a weight that settles over your entire existence without any identifiable source. Your external circumstances may be perfectly acceptable. You have a job, relationships, a place to live, perhaps even things that others would consider success. But inside, everything feels dense, labored, as if you're moving through water instead of air. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And this heaviness you're feeling is the unconscious pushing against the false self you've been maintaining, the version of you that was constructed to please others, to fit in, to avoid conflict. That false self requires enormous energy to sustain. Every day you wake up and put on the mask. You perform the role. You say the things you're expected to say and feel the things you're supposed to feel. And beneath all that performance, your true nature is suffocating, creating this inexplicable weight. What makes this heaviness so confusing is that you can't point to a specific cause. If you had lost something concrete, if you had experienced an obvious trauma, the weight would make sense. But this is different. This is the soul's rebellion against a life that looks right but feels fundamentally wrong. You find yourself going through your days in a kind of fog, functioning but not fully present, completing tasks but feeling no satisfaction, speaking to people but sensing a strange distance between you and everything you once felt connected to. The weight shows up everywhere. It's in your body when you wake up, a reluctance to face another day of the same patterns. It's in your chest during conversations that used to energize you but now feel hollow. It's in the way you look at your calendar and feel nothing but obligation, no excitement, no curiosity, just a dull acceptance that this is what life requires of you now. And the most isolating part is that you can't adequately explain it to anyone, because on paper, everything should be fine. Someone once shared that she spent 2 years feeling this exact heaviness. On the outside, her life looked enviable. She had a prestigious career, a loving partner, friends who cared about her, financial stability. But every morning she woke up with a tightness in her chest that wouldn't lift. She would sit at her desk and feel as though she was watching herself from the outside, going through motions that belonged to someone else. She couldn't name what was wrong, because nothing was obviously broken. But the weight was undeniable. She tried everything to make it go away. She exercised more, ate better, took vitamins, got more sleep. She told herself she was burned out and just needed a vacation. She blamed stress, blamed the pandemic, blamed everything except the one thing that was actually causing the heaviness. She was living a life designed for a version of herself that no longer existed. The unconscious was trying to tell her that she had outgrown the container of her current existence, that the person she had become was too large, too real, too alive to fit inside the small, acceptable life she had built. And until she listened, the weight would remain. Later, she realized that the heaviness wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation. It was her soul's way of saying, you cannot continue like this. Something must change, and it must change soon. The unconscious doesn't create this weight to torture you. It creates it to wake you up, to make continuing in the old patterns so uncomfortable that you finally become willing to explore what lies beneath. Think of it like an instrument that's been tuned incorrectly. When you play it, the notes come out, but something is off. The music is discordant, jarring, wrong. You can keep playing, you can force yourself to accept the sound, but the discord will never feel right because the instrument itself is out of alignment. This heaviness you're experiencing is the discord of a soul that's out of tune with its true nature. And the only way to ease it is to stop forcing the wrong notes and begin the work of retuning, of bringing yourself back into harmony with who you actually are. The unconscious creates this weight to make sure you cannot ignore what's happening inside you. It knows that if life remained comfortable, you would never change. You would stay in the prison of the acceptable, the familiar, the safe. So it makes the prison uncomfortable. It fills your days with a subtle but persistent ache, a reminder that something essential is missing, that you're living at a distance from your own soul. And if there's a moment in your life when you feel as though you're drifting through your days like a secondary character in your own story, observing but not truly participating, carrying a weight that has no name but refuses to lift, you may choose to leave a few words behind, a small acknowledgement that you recognize this sign, that you see what the unconscious is trying to show you. This heaviness will not disappear just because you ignore it. It doesn't respond to distraction or denial. It softens only when you begin to listen, when you stop running from the discomfort, and start asking the deeper question, what is my soul trying to tell me? What part of my life has become a betrayal of who I actually am? And when you don't listen through this first channel, when you continue to push the heaviness aside and convince yourself it will pass on its own, the unconscious will find its way through another language, one even harder to ignore. Sign 2. The whisper of the body according to Jung, the very first channel through which the unconscious attempts to communicate, is often the body itself. The mind can rationalize, deny, and distract, but the body cannot lie. It holds the truth of your emotional and psychological state with perfect accuracy, and when the unconscious rises, the body becomes its most faithful messenger. What you're beginning to notice now, if you're paying attention, is that your body has started speaking a language you don't fully understand. Jung said, "The body is the visible soul." He believed that the separation between mind and body is an illusion, that they are two expressions of the same underlying reality. When your psychological state is in conflict, when you're living out of alignment with your true nature, the body will eventually begin to manifest that conflict in physical form. These aren't ordinary symptoms. They don't respond to conventional treatments because they're not rooted in physical dysfunction. They're messages encoded in sensation and discomfort, telling you that something in your inner world demands attention. It often begins with something you might dismiss as insignificant. Your shoulders become perpetually tight, as if you're carrying an invisible burden that never sets down. Your chest feels constricted, as though you can't quite take a full breath even when there's nothing physically wrong with your lungs. You wake up exhausted despite sleeping enough hours, or you find yourself unable to sleep at all, lying in the dark with your mind racing through thoughts that lead nowhere. Your stomach churns with anxiety for no clear reason. Headaches appear and disappear without pattern. Small, unexplained sensations pulse through your body, a tightness here, an ache there, nothing severe enough to alarm you, but persistent enough to make you wonder. What's striking is that these whispers don't resemble ordinary illness. If you go to a doctor, the tests come back normal. There's no infection, no structural damage, no clear diagnosis. The medical system, focused on physical causes, finds nothing wrong. But you know something is happening. You feel it every day. The body is speaking, and it's speaking in the only language it has: sensation, discomfort, tension, fatigue. Jung believed that the body and psyche are not two separate systems operating independently. They are one unified organism. And when the psychological self is suppressed, denied, or forced into patterns that contradict its nature, the body will eventually begin to express what the mind refuses to acknowledge. If your shoulders are stiff, perhaps you've been carrying responsibilities that don't belong to you, playing roles that exhaust your spirit. If your chest is heavy, perhaps you're suppressing emotions that need to be felt, words that need to be spoken, truths that need to be acknowledged. If your digestion is disturbed, perhaps your system is rejecting something you've been forcing yourself to accept. A situation, a relationship, a version of yourself that your deeper being knows is wrong. The body doesn't speak in abstractions. It speaks in immediate physical truth. And when you begin to translate its language, you discover that every tension, every ache, every unexplained sensation is pointing towards something specific in your emotional and psychological landscape. The unconscious, unable to get your attention through subtle feelings or passing thoughts, escalates its communication by inscribing the message directly into your flesh. In Jungian-oriented therapy, the question is sometimes not what are you thinking, but what is your body feeling right now? Because the body bypasses the defenses of the rational mind. It tells the truth even when you're not ready to hear it consciously. A therapist might ask you to sit quietly and simply notice where tension lives in your body, to follow that tension inward and see what emotion or memory or truth it's protecting. And often what emerges is startling. The body has been holding the truth all along, waiting for you to finally pay attention. The body is not your enemy. It is the most loyal ally your unconscious has, the one aspect of your being that cannot be convinced to ignore what's real. When it begins to speak through sensation and discomfort, it's not attacking you or betraying you. It's trying to save you from a life that's slowly consuming your vitality. It's saying, in the only way it can, you cannot continue like this. You must change. You must listen. So when you feel your body begin to change in ways that medical science cannot explain, when tension and fatigue and mysterious discomfort become your daily companions, understand that you're not falling apart. You're being called inward. The unconscious is speaking through the flesh, and it will continue to speak, growing louder and more insistent, until you finally turn your attention toward what it's trying to show you. And if the whisper goes unheard, if you continue to push through the physical symptoms with painkillers and distractions, if you keep telling yourself it's just stress or aging or bad luck, life will be forced to raise its voice. The unconscious is patient, but it's also relentless. It will not let you sleep through your own transformation. And in that very moment, when the body's whisper becomes impossible to ignore, you step across a threshold into territory that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Number 2, the sacred collapse. When everything falls apart to come together, Jung believed that every genuine inner transformation must pass through a form of crisis, a breaking point where the old structures of self can no longer hold. He didn't see this crisis as a sign of weakness or failure. He understood it as initiation, as the necessary dissolution that precedes rebirth. This is the stage you may be entering now, or perhaps you've already begun to feel its first tremors. What's essential to understand is this: a collapse isn't a single catastrophic event. It begins with subtle cracks, small moments when the life you've built starts revealing its fault lines. A conversation with a friend that suddenly feels hollow, as if you're both speaking words that mean nothing. A moment of looking at your calendar and feeling a wave of dread at the weeks ahead. The realization that the goals you've been pursuing no longer ignite any passion in you, that you've been moving towards something you're not even sure you want anymore. These small fractures might seem insignificant at first, but they're the opening movements of a much larger shift. What's happening is that the false self, the persona you constructed to navigate the world safely, is beginning to lose its structural integrity. This persona served you once. It protected you, helped you belong, allowed you to avoid conflict and rejection. But it was never meant to be permanent. It was scaffolding, temporary support for a structure that was still forming. And now that you're becoming someone different, someone more real, the scaffolding has become a cage. The crisis unfolds in stages. First, you notice things that used to satisfy you no longer do. The relationship that seemed secure now feels suffocating. The career that once defined you now feels like a costume you're forced to wear. The friendships that filled your calendar now drain your energy. Nothing is obviously wrong, but nothing feels right either. You find yourself withdrawing, canceling plans, spending more time alone, not because you're antisocial, but because you need space to hear what's emerging inside you. Then comes a deeper realization: you're not just dissatisfied with external circumstances. You're beginning to question the entire framework through which you've understood your life. The beliefs you inherited, the values you never examined, the assumptions about who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to want, all of it starts to feel like someone else's script. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, that you've been performing a life rather than living one. These small things do not break you. They break the false self, the constructed identity that was never truly yours to begin with. And as that false self begins to crumble, you may feel as though you're losing everything, but what you're actually losing is only what was never authentically meant for you. The unconscious is clearing away the debris, making space for something real to emerge. A man once shared that he spent 15 years building a successful law practice. He worked 70-hour weeks, sacrificed relationships, postponed every personal dream, all in service of a vision of success that he believed would finally make him feel complete. But as he approached 40, something inside him began to crack. He started having panic attacks in the middle of meetings. He would sit in his car before walking into the office, unable to move, feeling as though he was about to step into a prison. His marriage became strained. His health deteriorated. Nothing catastrophic happened, but everything felt wrong. One evening, sitting alone in his immaculate office after everyone else had gone home, he looked around at the accolades on his walls, the expensive furniture, the trappings of success, and felt absolutely nothing. No pride, no satisfaction, just a profound emptiness. And in that moment, something inside him collapsed. Not his life, but his attachment to the story he'd been telling himself about what his life was supposed to mean. He sat there in the dark and let himself feel the full weight of the realization. He had built an entire existence around an identity that wasn't his. From that day on, he understood that the crisis wasn't trying to destroy him. It was trying to liberate him. The unconscious had been sending signals for years, subtle discomfort, physical symptoms, dreams of escape, but he had ignored them all, convinced that pushing through was strength. Only when the scaffolding finally collapsed did he become willing to ask the question he had been avoiding: who am I without this identity? Who am I beneath the role, the expectations, the performance? In Jung's view, a collapse is the moment when the ego can no longer dominate the psyche's direction. The ego wants safety, control, predictability. It wants to maintain the structures that have kept you alive and acceptable. But the self, the deeper organizing principle of your being, wants wholeness, authenticity, alignment with your true nature. And when the gap between ego and self becomes too wide, when the life you're living contradicts the person you're becoming, the self creates a crisis. Not to punish you, but to force the ego to finally surrender its grip. When the ego resists change for too long, the self creates a crisis that cannot be managed or controlled, only surrendered to. And in that surrender, something miraculous begins to happen. You stop clinging to the old structures. You stop fighting to maintain what was never meant to last. You allow yourself to fall apart. And in the falling, you discover that you don't disappear. You don't cease to exist. Instead, you begin to sense something beneath the rubble, something that was buried under all the performance and pretense, your actual self waiting to be discovered. You lose nothing in this collapse. Only what was never truly meant for you falls away. The relationships that were built on who you were pretending to be, the goals that belonged to someone else's vision of success, the identities that required you to betray your own nature, all of it dissolves, and what remains is the raw material of your true life, ready to be shaped into something real. And if you stayed with me this far, it means you have already shown the courage to look directly at what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You've allowed yourself to consider that the life you've been living might not be the life your soul is calling you toward. That willingness, that openness to uncomfortable truth is the beginning of genuine transformation. And if these reflections touch something in you, even just a little, you may choose to leave a gentle sign, perhaps a like or a subscription, not to support me, but to remind yourself that you are choosing not to turn back, that you're committing to the journey of becoming real, no matter how uncomfortable the process becomes. The pain of this stage comes from losing the identity you once clung to, the carefully constructed self that promised safety and belonging if you just played the role correctly. But without collapse, you would never discover what within you actually needs saving. You would remain trapped in the prison of the acceptable, living a life that looks right but feels empty, performing for an audience that doesn't even see the real you. Without collapse, you would never become whole. And this stage leads you to a crossroads no one taught you how to face, a confrontation that determines whether you'll spend the rest of your life recovering the same patterns or finally step into the truth of who you are. Number 3, the turning point. Confronting the shadow from this very moment, you are led to a crossroads that exists in the deepest interior of your being. This isn't a place you arrive at through effort or planning. It's a threshold you cross when the unconscious has finally stripped away enough of your defenses that you can no longer avoid seeing what you've been hiding from yourself. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, and he understood it to be one of the most crucial stages of any genuine transformation. The shadow is not some external darkness. It's not evil or demonic. It's simply the collection of everything you've rejected, suppressed, and disowned in yourself in order to be acceptable to others and to the image you've held of who you're supposed to be. The shadow contains the emotions you buried because you learned they weren't welcome, the desires you hid because they contradicted the good person you were trying to be, the anger you swallowed, the grief you postponed, the parts of your personality that didn't fit the narrow definition of acceptable behavior, the traits you judged as weak or shameful or wrong, the aspects of yourself that, if revealed, you feared would lead to rejection or abandonment. All of this lives in the shadow, and it doesn't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge it. It continues to operate beneath your awareness, influencing your choices, triggering your reactions, directing your life from the darkness. Jung said, "The shadow is not dangerous. What's dangerous is living without knowing you have one. Because when you fail to recognize your own darkness, it begins to direct your life in ways you don't understand. You think you are choosing your responses, but in truth you are reacting from your wounds. Someone says something innocuous, and you feel disproportionate anger. You encounter a person displaying a trait you despise, and feel an almost violent repulsion, not realizing that what you're seeing is a mirror of something you've hidden in yourself. You sabotage your own success, push away love, repeat destructive patterns, all because the shadow is operating the controls while you remain convinced you're making conscious choices. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the precise mechanism of how the shadow controls you. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "Hello, I'm the part of you that you've been rejecting, and I'm about to ruin this relationship." It works through projection, through compulsion, through mysterious resistance to the very things you claim to want. And it will continue to work this way until you finally turn around and look directly at what you've been running from. The first practice of meeting the shadow is daring to stay with your emotions when they arise, especially the ones you've labeled unacceptable. When anger surges, instead of immediately suppressing it or acting it out, you pause. You feel it in your body without judgment. You ask, what is this anger protecting? What wound is it guarding? When jealousy appears, you don't shame yourself for feeling it. You examine it with curiosity, asking, what does this jealousy reveal about what I want for myself? What desire have I been denying? When someone irritates you intensely, especially when their behavior seems to trigger something disproportionate in you, ask yourself this question. What part of me is this person touching? What quality in them am I refusing to acknowledge in myself? Because often, the traits we most despise in others are the exact traits we've exiled to our own shadow. The person who enrages you with their selfishness might be showing you the selfishness you've never allowed yourself. The person whose weakness disgusts you might be reflecting the vulnerability you've spent your life trying to prove you don't have. Simply stay with these observations without judgment. That is the doorway into the shadow. The second practice is listening to your body's language and your dreams as literal maps of your inner landscape. When tension appears in your shoulders, when your chest tightens, when certain physical sensations arise, ask what emotion or truth your body is holding that your mind refuses to acknowledge. Dreams, too, are direct communications from the unconscious. The figures that appear in your dreams, especially the ones that frighten or disturb you, are often representations of shadow material trying to become conscious. You don't need to be a Jungian analyst to begin this work. You only need to approach your inner life with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. The third practice is acknowledging the thing you most fear others will discover about you. That secret shame, that hidden aspect of yourself that you believe would destroy others' image of you if it were revealed. This is often where the most vital energy is trapped, the life force you've been using to maintain the facade of acceptability. What's paradoxical is that the very thing you're hiding is often connected to your deepest gifts. A person who has suppressed their anger may discover, once they allow it, that beneath the anger is fierce passion and the ability to set boundaries and stand for what matters. A person who has hidden their sadness may find, once they let themselves grieve, that they have access to profound empathy and emotional depth. What makes this confrontation sacred is this. You cannot face the shadow with logic or willpower. You cannot think your way through it. The only way to integrate the shadow is to feel it, to allow the emotions you've been avoiding to move through you without censoring them or trying to fix them immediately. This requires a kind of courage that most people never develop, the courage to sit with discomfort, to let yourself be messy and imperfect and human. In Jungian therapy, he discovered that the shadow is rarely something evil or monstrous. It's usually just the parts of being human that you were taught were unacceptable. The child who was told their emotions were too much learned to bury their feelings. The teenager who was shamed for their desires learned to pretend they didn't want anything. The adult who was taught that vulnerability is weakness learned to project invincibility. None of these strategies are inherently wrong. They helped you survive. But now they're keeping you from living fully. The shadow is not the enemy of light. It is the missing piece that makes you whole. When you begin to reclaim what you've rejected, you don't become darker or worse. Become more complete, more real, more capable of genuine connection because you're no longer performing an edited version of yourself. You can finally show up as you actually are. with all your contradictions and complications and humanity intact. This encounter with the shadow is the pivot of every transformation, because until you face what you've been avoiding in yourself, you cannot truly change. You'll just keep rearranging the furniture in the same house, creating new versions of the same patterns, wearing different costumes but playing the same role. But when you are no longer afraid to look into your own darkness, when you can acknowledge the parts of yourself you've spent decades hiding, something fundamental shifts. You stop running from your true nature. You stop exhausting yourself with performance. You begin living from truth instead of from fear, from wholeness instead of from fragmentation. You reclaim the energy you've been using to maintain the false self and redirect it toward becoming who you actually are. And once you cross this threshold, once you've begun the work of integrating the shadow, the unconscious will lead you into an even deeper experience, one that confirms you're no longer living according to someone else's design. Number 4, synchronicity. When meaningful order begins to reveal itself, synchronicity is not magic, nor is it superstition or wishful thinking. It is one of Jung's most profound discoveries, a phenomenon he spent decades researching and documenting. Jung defined synchronicity as the meaningful coincidence of outer and inner events that are not causally connected, but appear at exactly the moment you need them. When you change inside, when you begin living in alignment with your true nature, you don't just see the world differently. You begin attracting experiences, encounters, and information that correspond precisely to your inner transformation. When you dare to look into your darkness, when you stop performing and start living authentically, you dissolve the division between inner and outer reality. The unconscious and the conscious begin to work together rather than in opposition. And in that unified state, life itself starts responding to you differently. It is as if life itself whispers, "I hear you, I see you changing, and I'm meeting you where you are." It often begins with something tiny, so small you might dismiss it as random chance. You've been thinking about a particular question or struggling with a specific problem, and suddenly you overhear a stranger's conversation in a coffee shop that speaks directly to your situation. A book you've never heard of falls off a shelf in front of you, and when you open it, the first paragraph addresses exactly what you've been wrestling with. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and within hours they reach out to you. A song plays on the radio with lyrics that feel like they were written specifically for this moment in your life. These details may not change your life instantly, but they make you pause. They create a feeling of being seen by something larger than yourself, a sense that you're no longer moving through the world alone. You begin to notice patterns, connections, threads of meaning weaving through apparently random events. And the more you pay attention, the more frequently these synchronicities appear, until you can no longer dismiss them as mere coincidence. Jung said, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. The mechanism behind this phenomenon is profound." When you were living from the false self, you were operating in division. Your conscious mind wanted one thing, your unconscious wanted something else, and that internal conflict created static, interference that prevented you from perceiving the deeper order of reality. But when you begin to integrate the shadow, when you stop fighting your own nature and start living in alignment with your true self, that static clears. You become a unified system. And unified systems are far more sensitive to the subtle currents of meaning that flow through existence. It is as if life itself whispers back to you, confirming that you're on the right path, that the painful work you've been doing to become real is not in vain. These synchronicities aren't rewards or gifts from some benevolent universe. They're natural phenomena that arise when your inner state harmonizes with the deeper patterns of reality. You're no longer imposing your will on life, you're flowing with it, and in that flow, meaningful coincidences become as natural as breathing. A woman once shared that during the darkest period of her transformation, when she had lost her job, ended a long-term relationship, and was living alone in a city where she knew almost no one, she felt completely adrift. Every structure she had relied on was gone. She would walk through the streets feeling invisible, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by letting her old life fall apart. One afternoon, exhausted and on the verge of giving up, she sat on a park bench and allowed herself to cry openly. As she sat there, a woman she had never met sat down beside her and said, "I don't usually do this, but I feel like I'm supposed to tell you something. Whatever you're going through right now, it's preparing you for something much bigger. Don't give up." The woman stood up and walked away before she could even respond. It seemed impossible, absurd even, but in that moment she felt seen by something she couldn't name. Over the following months, synchronicities like this continued. Opportunities appeared from nowhere. The right people showed up at exactly the right time. Doors opened that she hadn't even known existed. The important thing is this: synchronicity does not appear when you want it to. It appears when you need it to, when you've done the inner work to become receptive to it. You cannot force meaningful coincidences through positive thinking or visualization. They emerge naturally when you stop resisting your own transformation, when you surrender to becoming who you actually are rather than clinging to who you thought you should be. Synchronicity isn't a promise that everything will be easy or that you'll get everything you want. It is confirmation that you have entered a new current, that you're no longer swimming against the natural flow of your life. It's the universe's way, or the unconscious's way, of saying, yes, this is the path. Keep going. When you shift your inner rhythm, the rhythm of the world shifts with you. You stop forcing and start receiving. You stop fighting and start flowing. And in that state of openness, life begins to collaborate with you in ways that rational thought cannot explain, but direct experience confirms again and again. And when synchronicities begin appearing frequently, when you can no longer dismiss them as random chance, you will feel yourself entering an entirely different territory, the final stage of transformation that Jung spent his entire life helping people reach. Number 5, individuation, reconnecting with the self, and when synchronicities begin appearing frequently, when the outer world starts reflecting your inner transformation with uncanny precision, you will feel yourself entering an entirely different territory. This is the stage Jung called individuation, and it represents the culmination of everything you've been moving toward. Jung said, individuation means becoming a single, homogeneous being, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Individuation is not becoming a better version of yourself, more polished or more acceptable. It is becoming the real version, the one that was always there beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and performance. It is the full integration of conscious and unconscious, ego and shadow, persona and authentic self. And contrary to what many believe, individuation doesn't make you special or elevated. It makes you finally fully human. This is also the stage where you feel pulled back toward your inner center with an almost gravitational force. After years of living on the periphery of your own life, oriented toward what others needed from you or what you thought you should be, You begin to organize yourself around something entirely different, your own truth. The external validation that once drove your choices loses its power. The opinions that once shaped your decisions become background noise. Not because you've become arrogant or disconnected, but because you've found something more reliable to orient toward, the quiet, steady voice of your own self. They see clearly what belongs to them and what does not. They can distinguish between obligations that arise from genuine care and those that come from guilt or fear of rejection. They know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to engage and when to withdraw, not because they've memorized rules, but because they've developed an inner compass that guides them naturally. This is the gift of individuation: clarity without rigidity, strength without hardness, authenticity without aggression. Peace does not come from having fewer problems or from achieving all your goals. It comes from living in alignment with your actual nature, from no longer betraying yourself in order to maintain an image or appease others. You discover that you can handle discomfort, that you can sit with uncertainty, that you don't need everything to be resolved in order to feel grounded. The center holds, even when the surface is turbulent. A woman once shared that she spent most of her life trying to be accommodating, easy, low maintenance. She learned early that her needs were inconvenient, that her emotions were too much, that the safest way to be loved was to require as little as possible. So she became an expert at reading rooms, adjusting herself to fit whatever was needed, disappearing into whatever role would keep the peace. She was successful by every external measure, but inside she felt hollow, as though she was watching someone else live her life. As she moved deeper into individuation, she realized that the accommodating version of herself wasn't kindness, it was self-abandonment. She began slowly and with tremendous fear to state what she actually wanted, to say no when she didn't have capacity, to express opinions that might create friction, to take up space without apologizing for it. And what surprised her was that the people who truly mattered didn't leave. They respected her more. They felt relieved, actually, because they had been relating to a performance rather than a person. And performances are exhausting for everyone involved. Once she allowed herself to live according to her actual nature rather than according to what kept her safe, everything became easier. Not because her circumstances changed dramatically, but because she stopped dividing her energy between who she was and who she was pretending to be. She became singular, unified, whole. From that day on, she understood that individuation wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about finally becoming who she had always been beneath the fear. Individuation is not just an inner feeling, it is a practice that must be maintained throughout your life. The unconscious never stops communicating, and the self never stops calling you toward greater authenticity. The work of individuation includes learning to live from the center rather than the periphery, to make choices based on inner alignment rather than external pressure. It includes dialoguing with your unconscious through dreams, active imagination, creative expression, allowing the deeper self to continue guiding you even after the initial transformation is complete. It includes honoring your own boundaries without guilt, knowing that you cannot be authentic while constantly betraying your own limits to please others. It includes recognizing when you're slipping back into old patterns of performance and gently redirecting yourself toward truth. Individuation isn't a destination you reach and then rest in forever. It's an ongoing relationship with your own becoming, a commitment to remain conscious even when unconsciousness would be more comfortable. What surprises many people who reach this stage is that individuation doesn't make you lofty or distant or transcendent. It makes you real. You become more direct in your communication, yet gentler in your presence, stronger in your convictions, yet softer in your judgments, more certain of who you are, yet more open to being surprised by yourself, less concerned with being understood, yet more capable of genuine intimacy. These paradoxes are the hallmarks of an individuated person, someone who has integrated enough of their shadow to no longer be controlled by it. Jung believed that individuation is not just a personal achievement, it is life's ultimate purpose. Not success, not safety, not momentary happiness, but inner unity. The alignment of who you are with who you were always meant to be. Everything else in life, all the accomplishments and acquisitions and relationships, are secondary to this one central task, becoming whole. As you enter individuation, every aspect of your life shifts toward greater authenticity. The right people move closer because they recognize in you something genuine. What doesn't belong falls away naturally, without drama or struggle, because it was never compatible with your true nature to begin with. Opportunities that align with your actual gifts begin to appear. Work that once felt like obligation transforms into expression, not because you force it, but because the self draws to itself what truly aligns with its nature and releases what does not. By the end of this journey, you may realize something undeniable, something that changes the way you understand your entire life. By the end of this journey, you may realize something undeniable, something that rewrites the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you're capable of becoming. The change you've been seeking was never in the future, waiting for the right circumstances or the perfect moment. It lived in the very moment you dared to face who you truly are, beneath all the roles, all the performances, all the carefully constructed versions of yourself that you thought would keep you safe. The turning point wasn't an event that happened to you. It was a threshold you chose to cross when you finally became willing to listen to what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. When you stopped running from the heaviness, the body's whispers, the sacred collapse. When you stopped avoiding your shadow and started reclaiming the parts of yourself you had exiled. When you noticed the synchronicities and understood they were confirmation that you were finally living in alignment with your true nature. From here, every choice you make will carry the imprint of your new awareness. Every relationship will be filtered through your understanding of what is authentic and what is performance. Every opportunity will be measured against the inner compass you've developed through the painful work of becoming real. Every step will feel lighter, not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours, the expectations that didn't belong to you, the identities that required you to betray yourself, the fear that kept you small and acceptable. You now have clarity about what matters and what doesn't. You know the difference between genuine connection and empty transaction. You understand that discomfort is often guidance, that resistance is often the self-protecting patterns that no longer serve you. You recognize when you're slipping back into old performances and can redirect yourself with compassion rather than judgment. You have learned to trust the unconscious as an ally rather than fearing it as a threat. And if this video has found you at a moment when you feel you are standing at a threshold, when the old life no longer fits, but the new life hasn't fully formed yet, perhaps it is no coincidence. Perhaps it is the unconscious offering a final reminder, a gentle tap on the shoulder, saying, "This is the moment. This is when you choose. Will you go back to sleep, or will you stay awake for what comes next? Are you ready to stop performing and start living? Are you ready to reclaim the parts of yourself you've hidden, to integrate the shadow, to become whole rather than acceptable? Are you ready to step into the life your soul has been waiting for, the one that doesn't require you to betray yourself in order to belong? The turning point is not ahead of you, it's here, it's now, it's in this very moment of recognition. The question is, what will you do with it?